Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for March 30th, 2015. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Decision items. Item number 1, 7612BZ, 148 Norfolk Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this one, they submitted a revised statement of facts to show that the floor joists between the cellar and the first floors will be maintained, as will the existing exterior wall framing on the north and south sides of the building. That was something we asked them to do to clarify how they complied with 73622. And they also provided drawings to respond to a request, I believe, by Commissioner Hinkson about reducing the ceiling height in the attic, but it just shows that it's unusable. There's only a little area for throwing bocce balls or something. And otherwise, I had no other comment.
Can I go? Continued hearings. Item number 2, 54556BZ, 2001-2007 Williamsbridge Road, Bronx.
They asked to adjourn this for a week.
Item number 3, 2557BZ, 22118 Merrick Boulevard, Brooklyn, Queens.
Okay, they submitted materials including revised plans, application printouts from BIS, and a revised statement of facts to establish that the adjacent tax lots are not part of the same zoning lot, so no merger occurred subsequent to the original grant of the variance. So I think I'm okay with this, and we would, just to clarify on the C of O condition approval, that the zoning lot cannot be enlarged without prior board approval, just to be clear.
Did you want a note on the drawing concerning egress, entry and exiting into that adjacent building?
Well, you know, that could happen with an easement, something like that. That's not a merger of a zoning lot, right? You could have legitimate
Right,
egress.
They would have to go through that process.
Yes, correct.
Can we put that on the C of O too?
Yeah, we could put that on the drawings anyway. On the drawings.
Just to make sure everybody's clear.
Right.
Otherwise, you have to number 2 CMOs.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Oh. New cases. Item number 4, 120365BZ, 1929 Bruckner Boulevard, the Bronx.
Is an application to convert repair bays to an accessory convenience store. There were many, and this is kind of a renewal or a continuation of an existing grant. I note that landscaping was a condition to many of the prior grants, but was never installed. Its installation will be a condition to consideration of a grant here, so it's perfect time for planting. So it should be done now. The photos were fairly illegible, so I'll listen to the commissioners who were able to do a visit. The Google Street View shows graffiti on the fencing, however. On the proposed plans, the number of spaces intended to be retained and for what purpose should be indicated. Are they all accessory to the convenience store, or some of them somehow related to service, and if so, where is the service anymore? Also, there needs to be a better line weight or symbol to clarify the location of the stockade fence and the chain link fence. It blends into the zoning lot boundary lines, so you actually can't tell where there's a fence. The material of the stockade fence should be indicated. And also, there are 2 drop-off bins that, for something or other, that show on Google next to the vacuum. Was there the intention of retaining those? They're not shown on either the existing drawing or the proposed. Any other comments?
I actually did a site visit here, and those are clothing bins that are over there, and you're correct, there is graffiti on the fence. Both fences are in poor condition and need repairs, and it definitely needs to be cleaned up behind the building where the landscaping is going to be, because people just threw all sorts of stuff back there. And I also was unclear about the parking spots because the statement says there are going to be 11 spots remaining. However, the proposed plans do show 16 spaces are still going to be remaining. So they could clarify that, that would be great.
And enumerate the spaces on the plan, say 1, 2, 3, et cetera. Also, I think that their curb cuts are in a different configuration than what was previously approved. It appears that on Bruckner, the two curb cuts are 22 and 26 feet, with 15 feet dividing them. But on the original, it shows that they're 30 feet with 5 feet. I don't know which one would be better, but they should explain how that became a difference. And I think there's a new sign mounted on the area light adjacent to Virginia Avenue, on, I guess it's the northwest corner. Would that be considered facing Virginia? I think.
The northwest corner?
Right, because it's odd, because it sort of faces Bruckner because it's in the back there, but it's actually on Virginia.
Yeah, it's on Virginia back there.
So I'm wondering if they've accounted for its actual location.
Oh, I had some questions about the signage. They give us a signage chart that shows about 9 signs are going to be removed, so I think they should just go ahead and remove them. And then the rest of the signage is all illuminated, and I just questioned if they were in compliance with the C2 signage regulations, because everything is illuminated.
Okay. Cool. Okay.
Item number 5, 3510 BZ, 144-11 77th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, so this is an amendment to a prior variance, where among the requirements of the prior variance was that the synagogue obtain a certificate of occupancy by March of 2012. They never did. And they also were required to obtain BSA approval for a change in ownership, but also didn't do that, and there has been a change in ownership. The most disturbing thing about this is that there are 8 open DOB violations and 14 open ECB violations, including a full vacate order, which they've ignored, and violation of stop work orders, which is even it's something you rarely see. You often see stop work order, but you don't see violation of stop work order on BIS. That means that's gone very far. There has been work going on for years without a permit, and also in violation of the stop work order according to both 2009 and 2013 violations. It's one thing if it's 2009 because that's prior to the variance grant, but it's also as recently as 2013. So this is not acceptable behavior. One of the things that seems to be the cause of the vacate order is that there's effectively a synagogue on the first floor that has space for more than 75 people, so they need to have a public assembly permit, and they don't. The explanation, the statement of facts for why they don't is because they don't have BSA approval, but that's not actually the whole story. The story is that there's probably inadequate egress and emergency lighting, et cetera, for this space. We need to understand what the status of the work is that needs to be done in order to obtain approval from DOB. The applicant should bring the architect and the contractor, and if there's an expediter involved in this, the expediter to tell us what's going on in detail. Don't want to hear from the lawyer, I want to hear from the people who actually do the work. We need to clear this up so that the only thing that's missing is a BSA approval. And in terms of a vacate order, that's a vacate order. It means you're not supposed to occupy because it's dangerous. The behavior of the property owner shows really utter disdain for the law. That's not something that we can condone, and so we can't consider approving this application until everything is cleared up. With respect to materials shown in the drawings, I'm confused about how a ramp to the first floor, which is not yet installed, which is shown on drawings, satisfies ADA requirements, because there's distinct activities on the second and third floor. It's not like you can offer the same activities on the first as you're offering on the second. So I'd like to hear from the architect what their thinking, his or her thinking is on that. There's also on the elevations a notation called unfinished brickwork. I'd like to know what that is. But otherwise, just the most minor part of it, which is the request, the changes that are requested don't apparently increase the degree of noncompliance. It's just that having come before us, we see how non-complying of a property owner this is, and the only way to force them to comply with the law is to withhold our approval until they do. Other comments?
Yeah, I think they need to explain why the changes should be considered in substantial compliance. They sort of just make a blanket statement that they're in substantial compliance with the original grant. And, that sort of only happens if you've gotten a letter from us saying that you've been in substantial compliance, and if you've changed your plan in any way. So it just doesn't happen. So I think they need to explain how they would be in substantial compliance in more detail, and talk about what the DOB told them that they needed to do to make the building in compliance. So clearly on the plan, we see where they have additional egress, but they don't really explain, what that means and whether or not there's additional work that they need to do, such as, you mentioned, being able to access the second floor. Also, could they tell us, show the new dimensions at the rear? The new deck is not as wide as it was, and they have an exit, means of egress out of the back there, and just make sure that they have enough area to exit the amount of people they need to exit from there. Also, could they show the same shaded areas that were non-compliant from the original? They just sort of bubble where they've made some changes, but I'd like them to go back to the original and shade in where the non-compliances were, so we can make sure that nothing has changed. That would be helpful. I think those were all my issues.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So you want shaded in where, like, the rear yard and side yard non-compliances?
Right, they have that
They-
on their original drawings.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure that nothing has changed, that the dimensions are the same, and they understand where our original grant, what that approved.
I was actually disturbed to read about all of the violations, and not just all of the violations, but all of the fines that have accrued that have not been paid. It seems like it's somewhere around $100,000 or maybe more. And I think that they really should put forth some sort of a timetable for repayment of those violations and resolution of them as well before anything else is considered, because I'm concerned that once they get their grant from us, they're just going to go about their business and not make any payments whatsoever. And as to the plans, they seem to have they're putting a kosher kitchen and multipurpose room in the cellar, and the kitchen was not there previously, so I'd like to know what the use of the kitchen will be, because I'm concerned about the intensity of use on this site, because it is still, even though it's close to Main Street, it is on a residential block. So I'm wondering, is it going to be catering, or is it only for just the members when they have small little get-togethers, and what would be the amount of people who attend?
Was actually one of the conditions of the prior grant, was that there be no catering going on at the premises, so this is smelling like catering.
Yes.
I'd like them to give us photos of the rear to see what the rear conditions are. And I think they should put landscaping on the plans.
Completely turn it. Okay.
We done?
Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items. Item number 6, 12614A, 3153 Richmond Terrace, Staten Island.
Okay. We have a 317 and a 326 submission with revised zoning calculations to show all of the buildings on the zoning lot. The drawing that was requested by DOT showing the largest commercial vehicle entering the proposed building and parking lot was provided, but it's a little unclear to me since the entrance is to the parking lot next to the office building and not to the proposed building. So maybe that's how you get in, but I don't see a curb cut because the drawings that we were provided aren't detailed enough to show a curb cut. So I don't know if that's how you get into the building, that you have to go all the way around through the parking lot in order to access this warehouse. I'd just like that clarified quickly at the hearing, or maybe they could submit a letter to clarify. They did provide the drawing, DEC drawing that we requested, so otherwise, I'm okay with this. Anybody else?
I have nothing.
Item number 7, 14014A, 1016 East 13th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they corrected there were some sort of disconnects between the checks that they provided and the list of costs, and they corrected all of that, and they removed a check that they couldn't account for and rearranged the disbursement data. They also verified that the analysis of the ground floor space was for ambulatory, it was analyzed as ambulatory care space and not retail. So I think they've buttoned up all the issues. Anybody else?
Yes, they have.
Continued hearing items, item number 8, 16612A, 638 East 11th Street, and item number 9, 10713A, 638 East 11th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, so this is an application that's been going on for over a year, and actually a year and a half, and hasn't been heard since August of last year. So given that huge amount of time in between, it's a little bit confusing to me, the submission by the applicant, which protests the Department of Buildings letter that says, dated March 19th, that's from the DOB, that states that as a result of an audit, there's still open issues about whether the permit was legally issued. And that, of course, runs to the question of whether the right to complete construction vested, and also about whether the C of O is valid. So the letter that's confusing that was submitted on March 17th by the applicant states only that DOB issued a ZRD1 on February 20th that removed the last remaining zoning objection. It did not include the ZRD1, so we don't know what the objection was that was removed. We don't know what other objections there were that were removed. So it seems to me, applicant, if you're going to make a case for yourself, you make a case. You don't just submit a little letter saying, we're good to go. You instead realize nobody's looked at this since August. They need a little summary of where we've been and where we are. And you attach the documents that make your case. So far, having no case, I just don't see. I noticed that either it was last night or this morning, the applicant made another submission, which it's impossible for us to read. So consider it not submitted in terms of this hearing. But my tendency is, unless there's a better submission, my tendency is to take this off the calendar. It's been adjourned 3 times since August. Take this off the calendar until they work out the details with DOB. I mean, it's just been going on and on and on, and unless you're working on your case, you're not a case. That's my personal opinion, but I haven't been involved in it, so.
Well, I would love to hear more information from Department of Buildings, if possible, as to what actually was resolved, because I know that we had a big issue with the use in the rear for this property and its legality, and also the building code violations because of that use. And I'd like to see how that is resolved going forward, certainly before we would consider a common law vested rights case, because I don't know if that's ever been resolved and whether the legal original use has ever been reinstated back there.
Yeah, I would agree. And the applicant even states that there are 4 or so open objections that he says doesn't have to do with zoning, so therefore perhaps we shouldn't be looking at it. But if DOB feels that, those are objections that require them to look further to see if the validity of the permit would still be in question, that's really our threshold, is the validity of the permit, not just because they got a ZRD1, which we don't know what the ZRD1 actually says, so we can't really even look at that. But I think that I would support taking this off calendar until they get their acts together.
So it's both cases you're taking off. One is the Buildings Department
Yeah.
application
It-
for revocation, and the other one is this vesting case.
Well, without the clearing up of these issues.
Both of them would have
We,
to, yeah.
we don't know where to go, right?
Yeah, well,
And
that's
just sort of
the issue.
these bold statements that say, we're ready to go, that doesn't help us make a case. I mean, that's the strangest submission I've seen in a long time.
Well, I did read the submission that the applicant gave us, this morning, and he's saying that there's no construction work involved, which is very puzzling because, as far as I knew, the minimum they had to do was remove the second floor at the rear, and then they had to provide additional egress. And I'm just really confounded how they don't have to do any construction work, and everything's been resolved, so
Exactly.
we'll see.
Okay. Okay.
New case, may I go on? New case is item number 10, 315 14A, 485 7th Avenue, Manhattan. It's an MDL waiver.
Sorry, okay. So, yes, so this is an MDL waiver for, we've been seeing a lot of these actually, to convert a building that was originally built as a hotel, that was converted into an office building, and now has to be converted into a hotel, and then all of a sudden, now it's in violation of MDL requirements for courts. So I thought, by the way, because I rarely see it, that this was a very well-prepared submission with really clear statement of facts. Pleasure to read. Like to know what is the status of the LPC review. Apparently there's a hearing expected in March, so how LPC responded to the location and height of the addition is relevant to us. There is a mistake in, only one, that I found in the statement of facts, but it's sort of material. I think they meant to say that the engineer would not recommend modifications to the court sizes instead of would recommend to enlarge the courts. The statement of facts also doesn't explain or doesn't mention really that although the 1980s court infill will be removed from the inner courts, the original court dimension was actually much larger than what's proposed, was 42 by 26, and the proposed will not restore that dimension as stated in the statement of facts. Statement of facts says it will effectively restore the inner courts. That's not the case. So I'm not understanding this exactly in light of the engineer's letter that discusses the location of the existing structure and why the courts can't be enlarged. It sounds like unless that structure was removed at enormous expense, which makes no sense, that actually you could pull that line further back. So it's a slightly different argument than what's being made. It's not allow us to go back to the original courts like there always were, but allow us to go to a reduced version of what there was, which is really a different question and would have to be established. There's a very helpful shadow study that was done, but the first part of it is there's a shadow study about Yeah, about the height of the buildings around, and it assumes that the subject is 15 floors at 180 feet, whereas the statement of fact states it's 16 floors at 198 feet, and with an addition will be 17 floors at 212 feet. So that's a mistake on the shadow study. Also, in terms of the incremental shadows that are shown being cast by that enlargement into the courtyard, there's a chart that's provided that says a shadow of, 15 by 36 will be cast for X number of hours. That's not helpful really to the argument because it makes it sound like it's this gigantic rectangle when in fact it's odd little shapes like sails and wings and things like that. So the shadows really should be dimensioned on the shadows and also the floors shown so you can see how many windows are actually going to be affected by the shadow, because it may turn out that it's not that many windows. The reason I think this is significant is because the data shows that in the summer, the east inner court will be in shadow 13 hours a day. So that's the whole day. That's a significant shadow. But if the size of the shadow is minimal compared to the window locations, then it doesn't matter so much. And then just one other point, there's included in the package, so the enlargement is on the roof, and it relies, and in fact the entire hotel relies on a light and air easement from the adjoining property. There's this funny thing about this light and air easement. Both properties, both the air rights parcel and the hotel are owned by the same entity. So in property 101, I remember this, my professor who I sat right underneath explained that you can't grant an easement to yourself since the interests merge and the easement is extinguished. There's like a great line that he said, which I would have to dig up to remind. But I don't think that this is the right form. I think it probably has to be a restrictive declaration. I know DOB just sort of is used to seeing light and air easements, but it makes no sense that you grant an easement to yourself. Any other?
I agree with you concerning the original size of the inner courts. I was sort of confused. I thought this was a very well put together case, but I was confused when they sort of go back to saying, well, we're going to make it back the way it was, and I'm looking for it to be actually larger, and it's actually at the 1980 80 size. So if they could make that clearer, that they're actually asking us to approve the 1980 version and not the original version, that would be very helpful. And if they, want to talk about, I guess, more of a history of it, but if it's 1980 that they want us to look at, then make sure that we understand that. And I too was a little concerned about the shading in the courts. We just need to make sure that they're going to comply with, I guess, MDL light levels perhaps in inner courts. So if it requires inner court lighting during the day, they need to tell us that.
I think there actually was some little submission by somebody who said they'll light it.
They're going to
according
light it,
MDL, but it was a little flying piece of paper which should have been incorporated into the statement of facts.
And they should tell us that
It's
they're
not on
going
the
to
plans.
comply.
Yeah, not in the
They
plan.
should show it on the plans.
Exactly. And indeed, you can't give yourself an easement. Makes a good bar question.
I just had a question about, they mentioned that they're in a special zoning district in a preservation area, but they failed to talk about how they comply or not comply with that.
Yeah. Well, there was a little footnote that said it doesn't apply when, I forget what it was. There was
Okay.
something about it, but there was a little footnote.
And I don't know if they've addressed like alternate means of ventilation for those rooms that are fronting on the court with windows there, because it seems like it's going to be a lot of, trapped air that isn't circulating very well. Excuse me.
Alternate means of ventilation in that east inner court.
Right.
I mean, compared to courts that we looked at in another application recently, this is gigantic court. I mean, the other one was like 18 by 20 or something like that. So,
This is pretty big.
yeah. Okay.
Item number 11, 16-15A, 233, 235 Water Street, Manhattan.
So this one is an application for a waiver from certain flood hazard regulations about the height of the first floor and cellar. In researching this, because I can't help myself, I saw, though, that I think, and I think the applicant agrees, and we're getting back to DOB on this, that historic structures are exempted from the application of this regulation under the definition of substantial improvement. It doesn't include a historic structure unless it's going to be used for residential use. So we have another application where it's appropriately here because it's going to be used for residential use. So though I'm sorry that we didn't pick this up earlier, I understand that the applicant picked this up earlier and had discussions with DOB. We're now in discussion with DOB, and hopefully we'll get this resolved quickly. So at the moment, we think that there's no need for them to come here. If it turns out, I'm not sure what it'll turn out, because it's very clear in the statute it doesn't apply. So we just need to, we're in conversation with DOB's counsel about this. Okay.
Zoning calendar, item number 12, 254-13BZ, 28881 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn. Excuse me.
Okay, so they revised the plans to show, as requested, the entry to the ground floor units from the street trees and landscaping. They have a sign off from DEP that has a condition that's based on the applicant's submission in February of a RAP and a CHASP. So our approval will be conditioned on their complying with DEP's condition. But other than that, I think we're okay. Anybody else?
Item number 13, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Item number 13, 4614BZ, 25260 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn.
They provided revised plans showing notes about noise abatement, sprinklers, and fire alarm. We did receive a letter opposing this application that states that the proposed PCE is partly in a residence district, so wouldn't be eligible for this special permit. But in fact, the zoning map that was included in the submission by that opposition was outdated. The site is fully within the C24 overlay. And my only open question, which we just need to clarify quickly, is I didn't see in the file the Department of Investigation sign off. I'm sure it's there, but I didn't find it in the file.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
I'll give you a
we
copy.
need to just
I'll
check
give
that
you a
before
copy
vote.
of the email.
Okay.
I'll give you, that I put in your file, okay. Item number 14, 5614BZ, 161-51 Bailey Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, we received a letter suggesting this novel concept, or maybe it's not novel, it depends on the size of your law firm, that the applicant initiate a tickler system whereby they are reminded by their system to submit updates regularly to the board to show that the site is in compliance. Nice concept, but there's really no way for the BSA to monitor compliance like this with such a system. We'd be the one who needs the tickler system, right? And at the moment, we don't have it. So I think, given what a nuisance that adjoining vacant lot has been, and the untested nature of this particular property owner, a 5-year grant is probably appropriate. And if they show that they have good neighbor habits, unlike the prior owner, that could lead to a longer grant in the future. Anybody else?
Item number 15, 6314BZ, 5500 Broadway, Bronx.
Okay, they provided an alt-2 application for the cellar showing that sprinkler work was signed off. There was another alt-2 application for the second floor. I'm not sure why they gave that to us. Just every sprinkler in the building, I mean, I don't know. The fire department sign-off, which is this just little piece of paper, is not specific as to floor location, so actually doesn't tell us anything. It could have been for the second floor, as far as we know. They also didn't respond to the fire department request that the applicant submit documentation that confirms that the required IFA and sprinkler systems are operational and up to date on inspections. That was a specific request that they did not do. So if they can get that to us immediately, we can vote on this, but otherwise. And also, I didn't find in the file the DOI sign off either. I don't know where they're going, so.
All right, we'll look for them.
Okay.
I know we have them from the list. Item number 16, 12414BZ, 1112 Gilmore Court, Brooklyn.
Okay. They did add a note on the drawing that the cellar use will be determined by DOB based on the floodplain regs. But that's, for me, there's a confusion that maybe Commissioner Montanez wants to talk about. It's not clear. The issue is whether the drawings elevate the building high enough, or maybe, in my case, too high. So, and it's not clear that this has been done. So there's a survey from October 13 that's clear that the measurements on the drawings are based on Brooklyn datum. So when I do the math, based on looking for what you add to get to an AVD 88, I get that they only need to raise the house something like 1.5 feet. So, but the house is actually being raised like 3.5 feet, from like 8 something to 11 something. So that means the house is a lot higher than it needs to be. And so, because the design flood elevation is 11 feet, right? It's just 1 foot above base flood, which is 10. So they have, as far as I can tell, they've raised the house too high. And that's been a whole subject about the houses being too high. So if it's incorrectly done, that matters to me. So what I'm thinking is we could add a note that BSA approval is conditioned on the house being lowered to design flood elevation, and if it must be raised, then they have to come to back to the BSA for at least a letter.
Well, usually what they would like is that the structural members for the first floor are above design flood elevation.
Okay, so does it work then?
Yeah, it's correct.
It's correct,
Right.
okay.
But they still show utilities in the cellar, and they still show the cellar not being filled in, which I do not believe DOB will allow.
Okay.
And they're supposed to provide their plans with all the elevations in NAVD 88, which they
Right.
also don't do.
Right, so DOB is not going to accept the drawings because it's got the wrong elevations.
Well,
Yeah.
they'll have to modify them. I mean,
Right.
I think they're going to have to, I don't know if that would require them to come back to us, but
Right,
they're not really complying with the current requirements at DOB.
okay, so,
We've spoke about this at the last hearing, and we just said that we would have DOB review all of these items. So I think
Okay.
as long as it specifically says, like utilities below base flood elevation, and they're not infilling the cellar, that DOB will look at that and probably make them modify the elevations.
so maybe what we have to do to make it clear is, well, it should be on the drawings, but it should be also in the condition of approval
Right.
that all of those things need to be looked at by DOB. It's not like we're signing off on anything
Yes.
to do with that. Okay. And that the measurement is to the underside of the structure.
Of the structural element, yes.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else?
Item number 17, 14314BZ, 746 61st Street, Brooklyn. It's a PCE.
Okay. I noticed that there was a submission like last night or something like that, and I didn't understand its purpose, except to confuse me a little bit. So they revised the calculations to remove floor area from the cellar, and so because it was counting towards parking, actually, and to show the limited parking requirement, which would have been 14 spaces, waived because 15's the waivable. And they added notes to the drawings as requested by the fire department. And there was a follow-up submission that said, no, but actually we have some 800 square feet or something that's an office that we're also not including in the calculations for parking. And I'm not sure if that's correct, so I would just like to have a condition on the a note on the drawings and a condition on approval that DOB is in charge of making sure that the parking is complied with, because, otherwise we have to get into where you count the cellar level for parking, which would mean they need to provide parking.
Continued hearing, I'm sorry, anyone?
Go ahead.
Continued hearing items, item number 18, 350-12BZ, 5 32nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, so I'm just going to make a comment about this because I've never been at any of the hearings for this. It's been adjourned 4 times since August of last year. So this is an application for a variance for a new construction of an 11-story homeless veteran housing. The site was granted to the applicant by the United States government by deed in 2011 pursuant to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which requires that in order for a land grant to be done, it must be used to house the homeless. So then we have an EDC letter. So this is an interesting conflict of kind of purposes, the public policy purposes, that protest the use of this site for housing and community facility use because it's in an IBZ and it's opposite a recycling facility. So those two subjects converge, and I don't know I know that there was a submission made on Friday, which made it impossible for us to review. I looked at this stack of stuff that's quite complex, and it was just impossible, given everything else, to review it. And I don't think that anybody else had the time to do that. You can't make a submission the day before a hearing. In fact, the new rule is you can't make a submission late. It's due 2 weeks plus a Thursday before the hearing, and then it's late, and you have to get permission to submit it after that. This would not have been accepted. So any other comments? I don't think we're...
Well, no, I agree with you. I think it's especially problematic when you've got a case that's been adjourned so many times, because we really need extra time to actually go over all the original files and catch ourselves back up to what this case really was about before we even go into the new submission.
I just want to say again, in terms of the applicant, how can you expect the board to instantly jump into your subject that hasn't been considered in 9 months or 7 months, wherever it is, and without some kind of a summary? You can't just submit all the stuff and say, here's my case. You have to say, we haven't looked at this for a long time. Here are the issues. Here's what was the concerns. It's not that the last issue remains and here's the answer, and, that's not how you make a case. Okay.
Item number 19, 225-13BZ, 810 Kent Avenue, Brooklyn.
This one actually requested withdrawal. A letter from February 26th requested it be withdrawn.
Item number 20, 264-13BZ, 257 West 17th Street, Manhattan.
The purpose of this hearing is to just stay on top of the applicant for status update. In February 19th, they provided photos showing work going on in the floor slabs without real explanation for what's going on. And we see that they're cutting out rectangular sections in the slab in front of each lifting rack, but they haven't explained to us what they're doing, and we haven't seen real test results of that, whatever it is they're going to install. Or, you know, for the ceiling, we had details. So we could comment about the details. In fact, we made comments. We said, no, these details are bad, and you have to change them. And they responded to those. And now we have no details. We actually don't know what they're doing. So they're going to great expense. So we could see them, they're cutting these slabs and all that stuff, but I'm sorry if they're going to do it, and it turns out the detail, that whatever they're dropping in there isn't properly isolated from the slab. We understood that the slab had not been properly installed originally. It was engaged with columns. It wasn't properly floated. It was only an inch off the ground, all that sort of stuff. So this doesn't necessarily cure it just because you're cutting something out and you're dropping in a little panel. I don't know. So we also received, from my view of it, was very difficult to understand photos on March 24th, which showed like a guy sitting on the floor playing with some stuff. I don't know. So I didn't really understand what they were supposed to tell us. Acoustalog, so Opposition's acoustical consultant, sent on February 13th a critique with photos of the ceiling inspection, which shows this very expensive ceiling installation was compromised by installation errors. If I were the owner of such an expensive ceiling installation, it's contractor's obligation to make the corrections if it's done wrong, and there were clearly things done wrong. There are penetrations in the ceiling, there's the wrong kind of access panel, which will rattle every single time that someone drops something and there's vibration. Those incredibly expensive springs seem to be rigid. So, you know, why fight that? Instead, take some helpful criticism and make those changes. Because in the future, it's just going to lead to problems. And it also, given their lawsuit, it's going to just show lack of cooperation. So they really need to respond. The applicant needs to respond to Acoustalog's critique. Other than that, I don't know.
I agree. I had problems with sort of understanding exactly what I was looking at. So perhaps in the future, they could provide us with a key plan of where they're actually taking that photograph, because it's sort of in space for, if you don't have the plan in front of you and you can figure out exactly, you know, where they are, it's like you're in some other universe. So a key plan, show us on the plans, you know, exactly what they're doing and why, and give us a detail of that flooring, which would be extremely helpful. And just an explanation of what I'm looking at. You know, I am looking at this section taken from this portion of the floor. It's made up of, you know, X, Y, and Z. Here's the detail. That would go a long way, because otherwise you're just kind of forced to try to figure out what they're thinking, and I'm too busy to do that. So.
Also don't have a crystal ball.
And I left that at home. So what can you do? Anyway, that's me.
I agree. I think they should submit plans, because they're cutting these holes through the floor slab, and then I'm curious of how they're going to support these particular areas without transferring the weight to the remaining floor slab. So I was very curious about that.
Right. Slabs have a purpose. Anything else?
I'm just a little troubled by the noise studies and the vibration studies that keep going on and for some reason are always conducted incorrectly. It just seems to me that the applicant would want to make sure that the right amount of weights are tested so that this way we could close the book on this and they can go on to life after grant. The more that they, you know, that they say they've dropped 180 pounds and then, you know, it turns out they really only dropped 95 pounds or 135 pounds, or they didn't drop it when they were supposed to and they didn't drop it where it just keeps on requiring us to redo this over and over again. And it's just adding time. I don't know why. The applicant should want to get this right and get this finished.
Right, absolutely. And with respect to that, so the opposition is recording things, and you can see all the neighbors upstairs have a little notebook near their bed with a clock, and it says at 4:33, this happened, right? you would think that the applicant would want to get on top of that, would want to know exactly what are the sources of the noise, have something very scientific, as opposed to like the guys at the gym who just like have, I don't know what, a camera that looks at the people training, and that's the source of their data. I mean, I'm not getting this. It doesn't seem like there's focus the way there needs to be focused, and this is costing them a fortune. So why
Why not
why
do it
not
right the
just do
first
it
time?
right and get it done? Okay.
Item number 215914BZ, 114-122 Jackson Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they requested an adjournment to April 28th, so that would be a submission due on April 9th with opposition on April 16th. Okay, there's an alternative if that doesn't work for them.
Item number 1212214BZ, 1318 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Okay, with this one, they cut back the attic level, so now only 2 stories extend fully to the 20-foot rear yard line. Would have been helpful to have seen an axonometric or a rendering of this version, and going forward, really, that should be the standard in all the submissions for this special permit. So, you know, this solution is not ideal, and it's still awkward with respect to the adjoining half-house, but it's probably as trimmed down as we can go and still retain the desired program of some usable attic space for the bedroom. So it's not my favorite architectural solution, but none of these applications are my favorite architectural solution. So I guess I'm okay. Anything else?
okay. I'm okay.
Item, go on? I'm sorry. Item number 2323814BZ, 9800 Franklin Street, Manhattan.
Was a submission made on this? No. So they requested an adjournment to 4/21 with a 3/24 submission. That means they've already
Correct,
submitted.
they submitted, yeah.
They have submitted, okay. So in that case, then we would be okay with keeping 4/21 as the hearing date, right?
421.
Okay.
Item number 2424114BZ, 517 East 117th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, they submitted a notice of completion from the DOB with respect to the sprinklers, and the plans were revised to show bad insulation in the demising walls and rubber flooring for noise attenuation, as well as the required fire alarm, smoke detection, and sprinklers. Oops, something strange, okay. On 3/26, the fire department confirmed that the applicant has requested fire department inspection of smoke detection and fire alarm systems, and confirms that the fixtures comply with the requirements, but due to fire department backlog, they won't be able to do an operational inspection for 90 days, but the fire department has no objection to us making a determination on this. Anybody else? Okay.
New cases, zoning council new cases. Item number 1, 30313BZ, 506-510 Brook Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, so, sorry. So this one, I've got this right. Sorry. They submitted so this one was one that we had a review session, but not a hearing on, I believe. So there were questions that were posed in the review session, some of which were responded to, but many weren't, surprisingly, and they kept postponing, so I'm confused why they needed to postpone if they weren't going to fully respond. They submitted a photo streetscape and a photo montage and renderings to show that typical building heights in the area range from 3 to 6 stories, similar to the proposed at 6 stories. We had asked them to use height information so that we could really make a comparison. I'd like to know very specifically, and they have to know because they own a matching building, what's the height to the roof of the adjoining property versus the proposed height? They provided photos of vacant lots in the area, but with no explanation at all on what the study establishes. The statement of facts was not revised to incorporate these submissions, so that would have been a clue somehow. Photos show work is currently going on at 157th and Brook Avenue, and therefore boring logs should be available for that. Usually when we ask someone to provide boring logs of adjoining properties, it's not that the engineer you hired worked on a site and that's their boring logs. They call their friends, the engineers, and they say, can you share your boring logs? And most of the time, engineers are quite cooperative and will do that. We're trying to establish that this is a unique condition, so having construction going on nearby is a way of doing that. There were also revised plans provided, but no explanation of what changed on them, and I didn't really want to take the time to compare this to this to this to this. They really should explain. They provided an engineer's letter about the boring results of a site at 599 Cortlandt Avenue without including a map to show its relationship to the site. Then there were all of these questions we had on February 3rd that were not answered. So generally we need more detail to establish uniqueness. Are there environmental cleanup issues? You need to clarify in the statement of facts that the allowable FAR for the community facility use is 4.8, and the total request is 4.94. So at least there's a similarity in bulk to what the maximum that's allowed in the district. There's still this disconnect, even despite revised drawings, what I found so confusing. The statement of facts that the building height is 58'8", but the zoning calcs on the drawings show it's 68 feet, and the maximum base height is 60 feet with a required setback. The elevation shows 58'8", but 69'8" to the top of the trash mechanical room, elevator room, which is built along the street line forward of the required setback. It's a very large structure. It's not just a mechanical and elevator room, which would be a permitted obstruction. I don't know that this really large thing is a permitted obstruction. It should be clarified and corrected. If they're requesting that we waive that as part of the variance, then they need to make a case for it, because why can't it be someplace else? Does the layout of the building depend absolutely that that's the location of the elevator? They also need to make clear on an area map where buildings of similar heights are located, and heights, not floors. That information is available on BIS, on other databases. The statement of facts didn't discuss the impacts on the area of having zero parking, the increased lot coverage, the density, et cetera. That's what the statement of facts is for. I'm also not getting why the EAS didn't look at the impact of zero parking spaces. And there's also no preliminary analysis provided of the environmental issues where the answer was yes on the checklist. You have to then screen it out. You have to actually say, this is the size of the project, and the delta between no building on the site and this proposed building will not cause an impact. You have to study that. The LPC also, the only thing that was provided really was a LPC historic site analysis, where they listed 3 sites that are that don't have architectural significance, but one that may, that's listed on the state national register. So the applicant has to reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office to find out how this project might impact that. There's also a DEP letter from January 20th that requests phase 2 testing, given the existing building's age and the surrounding site histories. No phase 2 work plan was provided. So what's going on? I also see that Commissioner Hinkson had asked on February 3rd Is there required parking for the church? Are we also being asked to waive parking for the church? What's the projected percentage of residents who would have a car? And what's the distance to the public parking? And Commissioner Otley Brown asked, is underpinning the building next door unique? Is it the combination of unstable soil and rubble stone foundation that establishes that uniqueness? So there were questions, and maybe there are still more.
Well, I think that's what they were trying to do with the vacant lot study, because they showed that none of the vacant lots were adjacent to old buildings with rubble stone foundations. So I think that's what they were trying to get at. And it would be nice if they had a Phase 2 completed, but they are relying on the underpinning of the party wall, the demolition of one building up to the party wall, and then the underpinning of that rubble foundation party wall, in addition to the soil conditions, because I don't really think the soil conditions are that unique in this area. So they're beefing it up with the underpinning and demolition.
Anybody else?
Item number 2, 147, 14 BZ, 4167 Ocean Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, so this is yet another 73-622 special permit. It's a one-story rear yard extension with the deepest dimension, a 22-foot 3-inch rear yard, so it's basically a modest proposal. But despite that, I found the statement of facts were very weak. They don't describe where the proposed enlargement is on the lot. They don't describe its height, the side yard reductions, the variable rear yard treatment. I mean, in fact, it's only the bay for the little breakfast area that extends into that reduces the rear yard significantly. The rest cuts back. It doesn't even mention that. It doesn't discuss the specific effect on adjoining properties or make an argument for an increase in floor area. It actually kind of doesn't do anything. The drawing should show how the modification to the depth of the side yard does not create a new noncompliance, because actually there's no, the addition has this little piece that goes into the side yard, but because the side yard is already deep, it's not creating a noncompliance, it's just taking advantage of some space in the side yard. It should also show the depth of the rear yard, excuse me, where that side is bayed. So there's two different rear yards, both depths should be shown. I think it is, but I question for sure whether a raised patio that's so high, 4 feet above, is a permitted obstruction in a side and a rear yard. But I note that the zoning resolution just says patio. So I don't really know what they mean by patio ever. So that's really a DOB call. With respect to the zoning lot area, I'm not sure, but there's some indication that this is the same zoning lot as the adjacent tax lot 230. I asked that because the survey seems to indicate that. The survey draws a box around those two sites. So, and there's no fence between this property and the adjacent property. And that I note that in 1993, both lots were in common ownership. So, so that could lead one to believe that it's one zoning lot, in which case the whole story changes. And also on the land use map, it shows lot 230 is a park, but it's in private ownership, so I don't know what they're talking about. And there's a fence around it from the public, so it's maybe my park, but it's not your park. There also, the statement of facts or the information shows that the existing building has an FAR of 0.58, so that's non-complying. They should explain how. Also, the perimeter wall height is 2 foot 4 inches higher than the permitted 21, so how is that? Is it an existing non-compliant condition? Does it predate? Is it a pre-61 condition? What is that? With respect to the rear yard study, it should have shown whether the properties to the rear with shallow rear yards, 17 and 16-foot rear yards, have one-story extensions, or if that's higher, that should be something that's standard. And what's kind of sad about all these questions is that the proposal is modest at only one story at the rear, which typically is what you would establish as complying with the kinds of things in the neighborhood. And the way I read the whole purpose of the 73-622 special permit was to allow an extra something at the rear. That was its purpose. And if this application had been better, we could have handled this in one hearing. But because it's really not a good application, it gets drawn out and it wastes a lot of everyone's time, and that's a shame. Any other comments?
Yeah, in 1993, I also got a violation for work without a permit for interior and exterior work. And so my question was, considering that they're saying that they have a non-conforming FAR, and they never received a certificate of correction, I think they need to explain whether or not work was done on that building that increased the FAR incorrectly. And I don't know whether anybody else had this problem, but I could not see the dimensions on the drawings very well, so it was really difficult for me to determine exactly how sort of big things were. Yeah, if they can dimension the rear yard and the deck in the rear yard, it was impossible for me to see.
My question is that this is in a flood zone, and it wasn't really addressed in the statement at all. And it doesn't appear to be a substantial improvement, but they're creating an extension on the first floor, and I'm not sure if they're allowed to increase habitable floor area below the base flood elevation. So they should address that.
Do you know what the base flood is?
The base flood elevation is 11, NAVD 88, but everything is given, you have to convert everything. So I would like to, is the first floor above the base flood elevation, et cetera? Because we had a case recently where they called those areas by storage. And that applicant told us you're not allowed to build below the base flood elevation.
Right. Okay.
Item number 3, 17114A, 17214BZ, 235 Dixon Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, this is a proposal for a variance and to construct in the bed of a map street. I note that the community board approved this on condition of providing visually permeable fencing and/or low shrubbery around the perimeter for daylighting on corners. Not really sure what that means, but that's their thing. Okay. So the first thing for me is they need to establish the hardship of a narrow, which they did not do, of a narrow corner lot not being self-created by subdivision from an adjoining lot. They need to provide proof that the lot configuration predates 1961 or the change in the zoning that required the yards from which the relief was requested. That was actually requested by the notice of comments, and there was a response to that basically saying, we don't need to respond to this. So I'm not really sure why you do that. Just answer the question. It speeds things up. They should show on the plans the location of the sidewalks and curbs of the adjacent properties relative to the site. The survey shows the sidewalk on Granite at 11 feet from the curb of a 37-foot wide street, measured curb to curb. The proposed project, as far as I can tell, would impinge on the sidewalk installation. They should show the depth of the resulting sidewalk as proposed. And they should they referred to an example of Granite at Granite and Ronald, the intersection, where there's a 3-foot front yard. But and they said, well, they have a 3-foot front yard, but in that location, there's a sidewalk plus a planting strip along the curb. So this is a proposal for a 3-foot front yard, and I don't know what kind of sidewalk. So they didn't show that. They should label also on the site plan. Oh, the label on the site plan is, this is just a drafting error, and by the way, it was so nice because it's a hand drafting error, and it's a pleasure. But anyway, a label on the site plan is incorrect about the location of the widening line versus the record line. It's 60 feet versus 50 feet, it's just that the numbers were switched. The statement of facts also states there is 2 different front yard reduction requests, 3.5 and 4 feet. The 4 feet is incorrect, so that should be corrected. We don't have yet, as far as I can see, a letter from DOT, but I would like them to opine on the reduction of the sidewalk specifically.
Yeah, they're looking at this.
Okay. And then with respect to, there was a corner lot study, they should discuss the narrow corner lots that have been developed pursuant to similar regulations for front and side yards and distinguish these from this lot. That that corner lot study showed a lot of lots that had been permitted since the 80s, actually. So are all of those complying with the regulations? And if so, what's different about this lot? Is it the only one, for example, that's subject to the widening, for example? But that doesn't necessarily qualify for a variance because there's the widening relief. I also note that the building is 10 feet from the adjacent building where an 8-foot distance is required. So we probably have 2 feet to play with to improve the sidewalk condition. That was also raised in the notice of comments, and the response to that was something to the effect of better to give the neighbor more space, but I'm not sure. In this case, you're playing the entire community against the neighbor where the side yard distance is complying. And those are my comments. Anyone else?
Let's see. I wonder if they have a builder's pavement plan, and I don't see any mention of street trees, and they're using an FAR of 0.6, but it requires a certain attic slope height, so they should show that they comply with that, whatever the requirement is. And I think that's it.
Could they actually show the dimensions and the lot square footage of all of the corner lots in the lot study? Make it a lot clearer.
Anything?
Item number 4, 20414BZ, 55 Wythe Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, this is for a reduction of required off-street parking spaces for ambulatory, diagnostic, and commercial use. So this was one of the more frustrating applications I read, and that's because of the EAS, the Sam Schwartz study, the drawings, and the statement of facts blended together, which all say a different thing, and trying to figure out what's the answer. So, first is that the application has to be coordinated because everything says something else. It seems as if the EAS, the engineer who was hired to do the EAS sort of like faded out into the Netherlands or something and didn't continue working, but there's the EAS still in the application materials, and then in comes Sam Schwartz, and then in comes Urban Cartographics, and then everybody's doing a different thing. So this is one of those things where I'm astonished because the lawyer's job is to coordinate the consultants. And if you don't coordinate the consultants, you drive the board absolutely crazy and slow down this process. So the first and most important thing is Sam Schwartz can do math and all of the others can't. The rest of all of the other submissions say there's 185 parking spaces required, and Sam Schwartz, using the exact same data, comes up with the correct number of 208. That's the first. The second is that everyone ignores that there's a 325-person banquet hall, which has a parking requirement. And it says superly clearly in the zoning resolution, when you look at a hotel, you count the number of beds and you count the number of persons in the banquet hall. So there's 41 spaces required for this banquet hall. What are your plans? So I'm so furious about this because I literally spent hours trying to figure this out. This is a total waste of time. Why is this here? But as long as we're talking, because I reviewed everything else. The plans include a 2007 firm map. If anyone noticed, there was this little storm that intervened, and they should include an updated 2013 firm map. The plans or the materials refer to 183 rooms or beds or keys. There's a difference when you do your parking analysis. It's beds. So if there's 183 keys, how many beds are there in the room? That's how you count. The plans don't show room furnishing layouts, so there's no way for us to verify that this is the rare hotel that has one bed in each room. The other thing is, nowhere in this submission is there information and a map showing the distance and location to which public transportation, the public transportation stops. That goes a long way to talking about the need for parking. The statement of fact states that the need for the waiver is because a below grade level would have to be added and that would be costly. I don't understand that at all, given the design of this very glamorous hotel. Why can't the first parking level use stackers as well? So the second parking level has triple stackers. Why can't the first parking level have triple stackers or double stackers? Or why couldn't the parking be located at the level above the current parking levels or above the retail podium? None of the statement that just doesn't have support. The Sam Schwartz study doesn't provide any backup for the parking demand assumptions. It does have drop footnotes about all the EASs and so on, but the assumptions should be provided because we need to understand that they're appropriately selected assumptions. The EAS was just amusing, is the best word I could use for it. It actually states, it's from August of 2014, it says it will do further analysis on the parking, and then it provides no further analysis on anything, and it doesn't refer to the Sam Schwartz study. It was so, it's just a terrible, just a non-existent, it just doesn't count as an EAS. In addition, it's completely wrong. So it starts off with an introduction by Urban Cartographics, which seems to be relying on a set of drawings that it attaches, and then the EAS goes on and uses a whole different set of numbers. So the EAS is just, frankly, it's garbage. Also the EAS drawings that were attached showed double stackers. For someone to do some coordination on this project, excuse me, I'm very angry about this application. The statement of facts refers to triple stackers. The other drawing shows triple stackers, so why does the EAS have double stackers? The EAS also refers to a site as being improved by manufacturing buildings, but the photos that were submitted initially with the application show a vacant site. So, yike. Anything else?
I have questions about the parking demand study. It states in the beginning that there's only a demand of 121 cars during the peak period during the week and 104, which seems fine. However, when you look through the study, you see that the parking demand that's actually generated by the office, the medical staff, and the medical visitors actually exceeds what they want to provide with the reduction. So it's only 66 provided, but it actually generates 94 spaces. And they're relying on the fact that the other uses are not generating a lot of spaces, but then you've got an issue with their assumptions regarding that. For instance, the banquet hall states that it's only going to have events after 4 PM on weekdays. But if they have events for lunch, then that's going to throw all of their estimates out the door, and then they're going to actually be requiring more parking than they're providing. So they need to talk about all of their assumptions and discuss why they feel that their banquet room is not going to operate during lunchtime, where I know that banquets do, because you have conferences in hotels, and then your banquet halls are operating, and you do have big luncheons. So they need to talk about that, address those issues.
I had questions about why they didn't use stackers in the other levels of the building. I spent like 2 hours trying to figure that out, and then I sort of gave up. Because it seems to me that if you can get triple stackers on that lower level, why you couldn't do triple stackers on that first level, and you'd probably make your counts. You wouldn't need to ask for a reduction because you probably can actually make it. So I just didn't see a case here without explaining why you could not, put additional stackers in, because that would solve your problem. So it took me 2 hours to get there, and then I stopped when I realized if they put stackers in, they'd be fine. So I think they just need to explain to me why they can't put the stackers in.
Well, they won't be fine when they have to add 41 spaces for the banquet hall.
That
We'll
would be
cure
an
their
issue.
problem about the banquet hall, but we'll make them... It's just an outrageous application, I just want to say, how dare you submit such a thing? Anything else?
Nothing else.
Just saying.
And on that note...
I just wanted to make an announcement that the video for the hearing tomorrow will not be up this week. It'll just take longer. It'll be up the next week. Carla's on vacation. So he's the only one who knows how to do it.
The world does stop.
The world will stop.
This concludes the March 30th public review session.
2 hours. I must have worked on that for 4 hours.
Marjorie?
And that's all I could get to, because
Yeah.
I was like, and I kept thinking, I'm missing something. I'm missing something, because when I do the counts, if I put stackers.